what is the best way to answer an icebreaker question like, tell me about yourself?
Absolutely. So that's, you're very right. That's typically the first interview questions. And if you're not very well prepared for this question, you might not be that confident for the remainder of the interview. So that's really giving a good answer. That's a great opportunity to create a positive first impression. So I would recommend starting with a concise introduction. So you want to begin with a brief introduction of your professional background. You might want to say, I'm a marketing manager with 10 years of experience of working in financial services, as an example. So mention your current or most recent role. You can mention your years of experience, and you can mention a couple of key skills or strengths. And keep this part quite brief. Definitely highlight relevant experience. You don't necessarily need to talk about every single job you've done, especially if you have 20 years of experience, but you want to focus on your relevant work experience and achievements, and tailor your answers to align with the job that you are interviewing for. So you really want to talk about the most relevant experience. So yeah, mention past roles, key accomplishments, and skills that are directly relevant to the position, and use this as an opportunity to connect your background to the requirements of the job. I would also try to mention a recent relevant achievement if you can. I know it may not always be possible, but if you have something relevant, mention the achievement. Also, like, share your passion and enthusiasm either for the industry or for the field that you're in. You might want to explain what motivated you to pursue this career, or what you find most exciting or fulfilling about it. You don't have to mention that, but if you're really passionate about it, then you can definitely mention that. I'm not a huge fan of mentioning personal stuff. I mean, yeah, like, you don't need to mention you're married with 3 kids unless you want to. I think it's maybe, if you want to mention something personal, I would honestly keep it to like 1 or 2 sentences. If your interests are quite, I don't know, like if there's some kind of hobby accomplishment outside of work that reflects positively on your character or skills, then you can definitely mention that. Maybe you do some volunteering, maybe you run marathons. I actually think that's great to mention. And at the end, you can just mention, like, tell them why you're interested in that specific position. You can explain why you're excited about this opportunity and how your background makes you a strong fit. So keep your response concise. I would say 2 to 3 minutes will be fine. I mean, sometimes, maybe up to 5 minutes is okay, depending on the role and your level of experience. At the same time, your answer should be longer than 30 seconds, because the mistake I see people make with this answer, they either ramble on for too long, they give you like the whole life story, or they just give me like a 30-second answer, not telling me anything I already haven't seen on their CV, on their resume. So you want to like give some flavor behind what I can see on your CV. Like, don't just repeat what I've seen on your CV.
What motivates you? What made you want to apply for this position? That's another one which I know personally, every interview I've been in, I've been asked that question. So what do you think employers want to know when they're asking that question?
Absolutely. So when employers ask about your motivations, they're trying to understand what drives you professionally and whether your motivations align with the job and the company. So how you can approach this question is, firstly, explain how your motivations relate to the specific job and company you're interviewing with. So you might want to mention aspects of the role or company that excite you and how they align with your career goals. You want to highlight your passion as well. So showcase your enthusiasm and passion for your work, and you might want to say what aspects of the job or industry you genuinely find exciting and fulfilling. And you also want to express your commitment to the long-term success of the company and your dedication to achieving your goals within this role. So how you can answer that? So you might want to say, if they ask you what motivates, you might want to say something like, what motivates me is the opportunity to make a meaningful impact through my work. I am particularly passionate about, and mention specific aspects related to the job. And I believe that by contributing my skills and experience to this role, I can not only achieve my professional goals, but also play a part in the company's continued success. I thrive on the challenges and opportunities presented in this industry, and that's what keeps me motivated to excel in my career. But the more specific you can be, the better. So if you can mention something specific on the job description that you've already excelled in, and it's just something you enjoy, mention that. Like, don't give them a very generic answer that could apply to any job.
How should I address my weaknesses in an interview? How should I talk about those?
Absolutely. So, so firstly, acknowledge a genuine weakness. So be honest about an area where you generally have room for improvement. It's important to show self-awareness, but please avoid cliches like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, you know, or I work too hard. Trust me, like every interviewer has heard it hundreds of times. It's just the most cliched answer. So you might want to mention a genuine weakness, but ideally it's just not something that's crucial to you being able to do the job well, you know. So yeah, so mention a genuine weakness, but just not something that will stop you doing the job well. You also want to demonstrate self-improvement. So after mentioning the weakness, explain the steps that you've taken or are taking to address it. So that could include training, seeking feedback, working with a mentor, and if possible, you want to discuss your progress in overcoming the weakness. So you want to share an example of a situation where you've actively worked on this area and improved. So let me give you some examples. So someone could say, I didn't used to be very confident with public speaking, but I've taken, you know, I've joined Toastmasters. I go to meetings weekly, and I can see myself getting more confident. Or you can say, I've identified that I sometimes struggle with time management. In response, I've implemented time management tools and techniques, and I'm actively working to improve my organizational skills. Recently, I completed a time management workshop, and I've noticed a significant improvement in my ability to prioritize and meet deadlines. Now, you also have to be careful, because if you're applying for a job where you're organizing someone else's life, like, you know, you're a personal assistant to the CEO, I'm not sure that would be the best weakness to mention. But it's, and also what you can mention as a weakness is something, a requirement on the job description that you don't have, but it's something small. So let's say you fulfill most of the requirements on the job description, but you don't know a specific system that they use, a computer program. You can say, well, I haven't used this specific CRM, but I've used 4 other CRMs as an example. You can mention the names, and you know, I believe it wouldn't take me long to learn. So this will be my way of answering that question.
Do you see through it when somebody gives you a weakness answer, and in the process of answering the question, they turn it into a strength? Would you see that as, oh, they're not really answering the question, or would you think that that's a good response technique?
Yeah, it depends. I know exactly what you mean. I can't actually think of a specific example right now, because I mean, some weaknesses could be strengths as well. I think, you know, the interviewer is asking the question to, I mean, it can work, right? So that, just sort of one example. Someone could say, well, I'm a little bit impatient, but, you know, on one hand, maybe it's negative. On the other hand, maybe because you're impatient, you get things done very quickly, you know, because you want to have it done. So I know it can be a plus as well, but ideally you want to mention something to show self-awareness. We all have areas for improvement, right? So I think it's good to mention something that's actually genuine and area that you're working on, and it doesn't have to be actually relevant to the job. Just mention something professionally that you would like to improve.
Fantastic. Well, we need to talk about strengths too. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about your strengths in an interview, you need to give specific examples. Is there anything additional that people should think about when they're answering what are your biggest strengths?
Yeah, you want to choose relevant strengths. So highlight strengths that are relevant to the job you're applying for. So consider the key skills and qualities emphasized in the job description and provide examples, right? So exactly what I mentioned earlier, back up your strengths with concrete examples from your work experience. You would want to explain how these strengths have contributed to your past success. So like, for example, if you mention that you have strong problem-solving skills, you might want to mention either a specific challenging situation you handled effectively. Now, you will not go into the full star format here. You would just mention the situation, or you can just maybe mention the types of projects or problems that you have experience solving. Just literally like list them.
So, in your experience, what are some of the most impressive questions candidates have asked at the end of an interview?
Impressive questions would be questions that show the candidate has done their research. So I remember interviewing when I was working for VMware, I was interviewing a candidate and he asked some great questions about the project. So he was interviewing for a role in France. He actually knew about the projects that the French team was working on. I didn't even know about them, right? And I was recruiting for them, but because there was something very, very specific. So, based on your research, what questions can you ask them? You also might want to ask, how will my performance be measured? Or how do you measure success in this role? You can ask, what would you expect me to achieve in the 6 to 12 months? You know, the 6 months or to 12 months. Most people like talking about themselves, so you can even ask the interviewer, well, what do you like about working here? You can ask about what kinds of people succeed in this organization. You can ask about the typical career path. You can ask about the biggest challenges that the team is facing, and how the role can help address them. So yeah, these will be like the main questions.
So what advice would you have for chasing up after an interview?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I mean, sometimes candidates don't even know what the next step would be. And ideally you want to find out during the interview, when are you supposed to hear back and what's the next step. So ideally you want to ask those questions during the interview, or ask your recruiter. But yeah, following up. So in terms of following up, firstly, I would recommend sending a thank you email within, say, 24, 48 hours after the interview. Send a personalized email to each of the person you interviewed with. If you don't have their email addresses, that's fine. Just maybe you can mention, email your recruiter and send, maybe, ask to forward the messages. But basically, you want to express your gratitude for the opportunity to interview. You can mention something specific from the interview that reaffirmed your interest in the position of the company. You want to reiterate your enthusiasm for the role, and obviously you want to keep the email very concise, very professional, and error-free. I think that goes without saying. So it could be something like, dear, whatever the name is, I wanted to express my gratitude for the opportunity to interview for, this job at this company. Our discussion about, and then mention specific topics, further solidified my enthusiasm for the role and potential contributions I could make to your team. I'm excited about the opportunity to join, the company name, and contribute to your continued success. And yeah, you look forward to feedback. So, secondly, so thank you email, and then respect their timeline. So during the interview, you would want to inquire about the expected timeline for the decision-making process. If they mention a specific timeline or next steps, respect that timeline. If they didn't provide one, it's definitely acceptable to politely ask about their approximate timeline for making a decision. So as an example, if they say, well, you're the first person we've interviewed, it's going to be 2 weeks before we come back to you with feedback. Don't email them 5 days later asking for feedback, right? Normally, it would be absolutely fine to follow up within a week, but if they tell you in an interview, you're not going to hear back from us for 2 weeks, then I would just respect that. And then follow up if the timeline passes. So if they told you they would come back to you within a week, and then you don't hear from them, it's absolutely appropriate to send a brief and polite follow-up email to check on the status of your application. That can just be a friendly reminder, and also express your continued interest. So you would just need to say, hope you're well. I wanted to follow up regarding the status of my application. As our last conversation left me quite excited about the opportunity to contribute to, whatever the role is. I'm eager to learn more about the next steps in the process. And you can even say something like, I understand these decisions can take time, and I want to assure you of my continued interest in the role. If there is any additional information or documentation you require from me, please don't hesitate to reach out. So just something like that. You obviously want to be professional, so you want to maintain a professional and courteous tone. Don't send multiple follow-up messages within a short period, because that can be perceived as pushy or impatient. Just allow a reasonable time for the employer to respond. If you don't get responses, which unfortunately is quite common, I think it's so rude. Like, once you've interviewed, the company really should get back to you. You also might want to consider, so let's say you don't hear back, you might want to consider making a brief and polite phone call to HR person or your recruiter, just to check, and yeah, just kind of be prepared for any response. Like, employer may respond with updates, requests, or additional information. They sometimes will not respond. I think this is very rude, and I know it's very disappointing, and actually would not want to work for a company who can't be bothered to respond. It happened to me as well. I've gone through 5 interviews and then received no feedback, which I think was super unprofessional. But regardless of the outcome, you just want to stay professional, continue your job search, and yeah, just maintain professionalism throughout the process.
Fantastic. Okay. So during that time, while I'm waiting to get my feedback, what should I be doing? Should I be, would you recommend waiting on the employer to get back to me, really commit to this job opportunity, or shall I just treat it as if, this job isn't going to happen, move on to the next opportunity?
No, please don't ever do that. You always continue to interview until you've signed the contract. Like, you literally should be continuing to interview until you've signed the contract. Not even if I can't tell you how many times I've seen that They even make an offer, and then for whatever reason, so a friend of mine, she actually got a verbal offer from the company, and then she was waiting for the contract. She was chasing, apparently were chasing something. Would you believe the contract never came? Luckily, she was interviewing for other positions and she got a new job. She got another job. She accepted another offer quite quickly, but something happened and they had to withdraw the position, right? So I think you should always interview until you don't ever, like, it doesn't matter how well you think the interview went. Listen, the interview could have gone great. They might have told you you're a perfect fit for the position. And then something can happen. An internal candidate will apply and they want to interview them. And then they decide to give the role to an internal candidate. I've seen that happen so many times. Sometimes you are an amazing candidate. Unfortunately, for your, another even more amazing candidate is, they find an even more amazing candidate 2 days later who has maybe even just a little bit more of more relevant experience than the team needs. So just the fact you get positive feedback from an interview honestly doesn't mean that you will get an offer. So I would definitely recommend that you keep applying, that you keep interviewing until you have your contract signed.
One other key thing which I think we do need to talk about, we haven't touched on yet, is salary negotiation. Obviously, you need to talk about money at some point in the process, and a lot of applicants get freaked out by salary negotiations. So what advice do you have for this part of the recruitment process?
So yes, salary negotiations can be nerve-wracking, but just remember it's a standard part of the process. So firstly, you want to research the market rates. So before the interview, research salary ranges for similar positions in your industry, location, and your level of experience. Websites such as Glassdoor, PayScale, Salary.com, LinkedIn can provide valuable data. Now, it's not always accurate because I sometimes look at these sites and I know it's the salaries listed are way too high or way too low. So it's not always going to be accurate, but it will give you some kind of data. So this research will help you determine a reasonable salary range to aim for. And talk to other people. Like if you have other colleagues maybe doing a similar role, they hire people with similar background, just ask them what they think you could be expecting. So I remember actually talking, there was a role I interviewed for years and years ago, but anyway, I kind of had an idea of what the range should be, but anyway, I spoke to a friend who was working at that level in a big tech company, and actually what she was, I'm not sure that it was what she was earning, but what they were earning was so much more than I actually thought I could even ask for, right? Which was great. So you want to research the market rates. You want to know your value, right? So you want to recognize your worth based on your skills, your qualifications, and the value that you bring to the company. And you want to be prepared to articulate how your experience and expertise align with the responsibilities of the role, and you want to justify the compensation you're requesting. You also want to wait for the right moment. So typically you want to wait for the employer to initiate the salary discussion. If they ask about your salary expectations, I mean, kind of think, ideally try to defer the question until you have a better understanding of the job's requirements. So you can say, I'm open to discussing the compensation, but I'd like to learn more about the role first. If they are pushing you for an answer because they want kind of send you details to the hiring manager, mention a range. I think it's much easier to mention a range versus a specific number. If you mention just one specific number, you're never going to get any more than that. You might just want to, based on your research, you might want to say, well, the roles I'm interviewing for pay between, and mention a range. And, I'll be flexible based on the requirements of the role. So something like that. You also want to be prepared to justify your request. So when discussing your desired salary, be ready to explain your reasoning. So mention any specific skills, experiences, or qualifications that justify your request, because that demonstrates your understanding of the position and the market. And you also want to consider the entire compensation package. So obviously the compensation is not just the base salary, right? So there could be maybe bonuses or benefits or stock options or opportunities for professional development when negotiating, because these elements can significantly impact your overall package. You want to practice your negotiation skills with a friend or mentor or coach. You want to remain professional and confident. You definitely want to remain courteous all the time. Like your goal is a win-win solution. Yes, you don't want to make ultimatums. You don't want to use any aggressive tactics. You want to frame your request in a collaborative manner, emphasizing how your skills and goals align with the company's interests. You might also want to consider some trade-offs. So if the employer can't meet your salary expectations, consider other forms of expectations. Maybe they can offer you flexible work arrangements, maybe performance-based bonus, maybe additional vacation days. So be open to those alternative solutions. At the same time, it's important to be flexible, but you also want to determine the bottom line that you're willing to accept. That will give you a clear boundary during the education. And also be prepared to make a decision. Like once the employer makes you an offer, you might want to take your time to review it. You don't need to say yes or no immediately. So if it's not in line with your expectations, it's acceptable to request additional time to consider it. But once you accept it, you obviously want to do it confidently and professionally. I would just also say, if the employer doesn't bring up the salary expectation in the first interview or during the recruiter screen, which is what I normally do, that can mean a couple of things. I mean, it can mean that their salary ranges are truly flexible and they actually would be willing to open to pay whatever they need to for that specific location. But it can also be a sign that they're not very sophisticated in the recruitment practices. I remember interviewing for a position, again, years and years ago. I got contacted about the role. The role sounded interesting. I didn't want to bring up the salary first, so I continued to have 2 one-hour interviews with the hiring manager, only to find out the maximum salary was exactly what I was earning. And I'm like, I'm not going to move for exactly the same salary. So honestly, since then, when I get contacted by recruiters, if they don't mention the salary, I would either ask about the range or at least tell them what I'm currently on, and ideally you don't want to tell them what you're currently on, but you don't want to waste 5 hours interviewing for a job that pays 20,000 less than what you're looking for as well, right? So yeah, if they don't mention that, maybe just talk to the recruiter, and you can just maybe even after the first screen, you can say, well, I've realized you haven't discussed compensation. I am looking for, mention the range. Does that fit within your salary ranges?
Fantastic. Okay, so let's say, for example, they give me a salary, an estimated salary, and it's slightly below what my bottom line is. How would you handle that? Would you try to push back, like negotiate, or aim for other forms of compensation?
Depends on what has been discussed with you during the interview process. If you have if you have mentioned at the start what you're looking for, and this is still below what you're looking, this is still below what has been discussed, and they've never mentioned that they can't pay any less, then I would say, thank you so much for the offer. Really excited to potentially work about the opportunity to work with you. However, as mentioned during our initial conversation, I was looking for a minimum of, and mention your salary range. What can we do to negotiate, or what room for flexibility do we have here? However, if they have already mentioned what their range is, so what actually really annoys me is, like, if I speak to someone, the start of the process, I tell them, this is our maximum. It happens when I speak to the candidate. They tell me the range. I'm like, listen, the role actually can't pay that, and I will tell them what our maximum is. Yes. Sometimes, if the candidate is already a high earner, they might want to consider a slight reduction in salary because they really like the company or they really, really like the role. And if it's a 6-figure salary, the 5-10K one way or the other might not be a huge difference after tax. But if you know what the maximum salary is, and then you suddenly try to negotiate knowing it's a maximum salary, that's probably not going to work, and that's, if you know from the start, I wouldn't say there's always a room for negotiation. I would say there's often a room for negotiation. Also depends if you are working in public or private sector, because in a lot of these public sector jobs, you've got these salary bands, you've got the specific levels, and I don't think there's that much room for negotiation there. So it just really depends on your situation. But if you've asked for more and they told you they could pay more, and then suddenly they give you a little bit less, absolutely try to negotiate 100%. And I would just emphasize again what you can bring to the role. And yeah, you can mention, I'm looking for a minimum of this and that, and what room, what flexibility do we have here? Because quite often the employers will try to offer you a little bit less, right? So I think I've always negotiated.